Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our panel on Rethinking Museum Operations. We've got Alistair Otto here, who's Associate Director of the Science Museum Group, Andrew Bailey, a colleague of Alistair's, who's Head of Operations for the Science Museum in London, Spencer Clark, who is Sales Director at ATS Heritage, who do multimedia content for museums and heritage sites, and finally, Jo Hargreaves, who is founding director at Morris Hargreaves McIntyre, who provide us all in the heritage industry with a lot of insight into our audiences. So as you all know, we're still at a state of vast and fast change, and yesterday's rule of 6 is yet another example of the shifting sands that we're all trying to navigate at the moment. So our panel today will give us some experience of what they have worked out as in this wildly adapting world that we're in. So Alistair will kick off with an overview of the financial impact on museums and how the government support is being used, and his view from the Science Museum Group. Andrew will take us through the planning and the reality of putting all the operations plans into reality at Science Museum London, which is perhaps a bit more complex than an art gallery because of the hands-on elements. Spencer will talk about how multimedia guides can help with visitor flow and visitor engagement. And Jo will provide us with an idea of how visitors are responding to this new museum experience and some of the counterintuitive findings from MHM's research. So each speaker will have 10 minutes, and as they do, please ask questions in the chat or in the questions function on the screen. Don't be shy. It's the Q&As which actually bring out a lot of the really interesting facts and tips and tricks of how to navigate the time that we're living through. So please ask away, and then after everyone's spoken, we will go to the questions. So without further ado, over to you, Alistair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers, Lizzie. I'll just see if I can get my computer to work here just to throw up the presentation. Get new to all of this. I can't see it at the moment. We did have a practice, I promise. Let's see if I do this. Not going to do anything. That doesn't like it. Let's have a look. Here we go. I found it. Let's share this. Let's go like that. Hopefully you can all now see that. Hello everyone, it's great to be able to meet with you all and see there's some from Australia, so thanks for joining us. I'm Alistair, I'm the Associate Commercial Director, and I'm just going to give you a flavour of what we've experienced from the Science Museum Group commercially since we've been reopened, and what this might mean for us in the future. I lead a team that is responsible for the core commercial visitor-facing offer across 5 museum sites based here in the UK. Our main and probably most notable museum is the Science Museum in London. And then we are across a lot of the north of in the UK. In England, we've got museums in Manchester, Bradford, York, and Shildon up in County Durham. Our museums are places where people of all ages and backgrounds can engage with science, technology and engineering, and we celebrate the past, the present and the future, and hopefully we can inspire people. Certainly COVID has put a significant spin on our business and what it is, and actually we're reopening with a much smaller business than we were. And for example, just in the Science Museum alone, this time of year during our summer trading period, we would have had 4 cafes open. We're now down to just 2. We would have opened 3 or 4 flight simulators that the families can enjoy. We haven't opened any of those. And our retail outlets, well, we're just down to 1 at the moment, and a lot of our satellite stores, which used to have 3 to 4, have also closed. So we're having to adapt and change our model to suit. And I'll just talk you through these key areas across retail, catering, what we call commercial experiences, and our event side of things just now. Within catering, we have 3 catering partners. We don't do it in-house, and we've had to undertake a lot of detailed discussions commercially and contractual discussions to try and balance those contracts. We had minimum guarantee payments set within those contracts, which are now unattainable. So we've had to spend a fair amount of time working through that. We also didn't want to look at bringing catering in-house. It would have been such a huge operation for us to do that. We've just had to come to terms on certain contracts, which means in the short term a significant financial sacrifice, but hopefully in the long term it means that we've got the right catering partners on board. And actually we've seen quite a good response in our catering outlets thus far with the measures that we've put in place. People are willing to spend with us. We've seen the spend per visitor be about the same that we were experiencing last year, and in some cases it has been better. So we're really pleased with that thus far. One of the things that has changed our operations and how we talk to visitors in advance is about the booking process. You now have to have a ticket to attend all our sites, and you didn't previously. So we get a great opportunity to talk to visitors and offer things up front to them, which we hadn't normally sort of considered. That would be things like lunch boxes, prepaid meals in our cafes, also our guidebooks. And we've done over 1,000 lunches thus far across the group, which has far outstripped our expectations. And also 87% of our guidebook sales have now moved online. So it's a real opportunity, and we've had to take a lot of time, and there's still ongoing thought and consideration about what that visitor journey looks like online to make sure that we make the most of it, and importantly that we don't cannibalise a lot of our income opportunities, particularly when we're also asking for visitor donations. We will see how that goes. It's going to develop, but we are changing behaviour. Just for example, we have an interactive gallery that's called WONDERLAB in London. Previously here you can see sort of what the sales process was like with only a third on the web. We've now shifted that to 88% on the web, which is a really interesting change for us. And we'll have to see how we react to that moving forwards as more commercial experiences come online. In retail, our spend per head has doubled, which was significant compared to what we've done in previous years. We believe this is down to a better shopping experience. Our shops are generally quieter. It's a more managed experience, whereas in the summer it was very busy in there. There's also less competition as well. So it's across the sites as well. So that's, we have to take that into account. And as we bring more back on board in our museums, we may expect our retail spend to drop again, but we'll see. Importantly though, whilst we've had 70% fewer visitors come through our doors, we're only 44% down on income in retail, which has been a great thing for us. One of the huge pluses for us actually is our online shop. The Science Museum store relaunched in February this year in the nick of time before we went into lockdown. And because we work with a third party to fulfill our orders, we were able to maintain our operations throughout lockdown. And we've seen sales rise by 85% on our online store. Now that doesn't go anywhere near replicating the sort of sales that we did see in-house, but it does enable us to look at the dynamics of that particular arm of our retail offer and how we adapt our teams to focus more heavily on this side of things. So we are gearing up and changing our team and our structure to respond to that in the short term. Commercial experiences, that was one of the challenges. We set out very early on that our core commercial offer is very much a part of the visitor journey across the Science Museum group, whether that's retail, catering or commercial experiences. But our commercial experiences are so socially connected. They're very hands-on. It's what we're known for. In fact, we get complaints that we're not hands-on enough across our museums. So we knew that from the outset. We really wanted to make sure that our paid-for WONDERLAB gallery, our interactive gallery with 50 hands-on exhibits, would be open, and we've been able to do that. And we've had over 10,000 visitors thus far. The important thing for us, which I'm sure Andrew will talk about from an operations perspective, was to make sure that we hadn't sanitized the experience, that it's still fun, that it's still very much hands-on, and that you can get a lot out of your visit with our explainers on hand who are talking about the core principles of science. We have a rail simulator up in York, and we've been able to open that. And again, we've shifted a lot of that business online, prepaid in advance, which is great for us. And interestingly, just on what we found is that if we do get visitors to buy in advance, in addition to their free ticket, if they book, add on something into there, then we're seeing our the drop-off rate in terms of attendance drop by about 20%. So we're about 39% when visitors only book a free ticket. If they add something onto it, they're more likely to come. That is better for us in terms of trying to maximise the very limited capacity that we've got at all our sites. And as you can see there, the spend per visitor across our commercial experiences is 30% up. But again, very much a smaller volume of numbers. We haven't opened everything. Our IMAX Theatre in London is currently under refurbishment. That will open later this year. But our IMAX Theatre in Bradford will reopen next week. And we're looking forward to welcoming visitors back into that area. The changing landscape for our business is significant, as I mentioned, and we have our events business has been a huge part of what we've done at the Science Museum, and it's grown over the last number of years. We've opened a new venue at the top of the Science Museum last year, and that had grown to over £1 million worth of revenue in its first year. And we were about to open an additional space in Manchester for corporate events, which we've had to put on ice for now. Because we don't see events coming back in the short term, we've had to look at how we can use our spaces in a different way. And what you can see on screen right now is a digital presentation platform that could be used for virtual presentations. This is alongside one of our AV partners. We've put one of these in London, and we've put two smaller versions up in the north. It means that we can connect conferences, we can try and bring people together in a different way and leverage a rental from those spaces. Because our sites are also now only open 5 days a week and instead of 7 days a week, that gives us different opportunities from an events perspective. We may be able to move events from very small spaces into larger galleries, so people can socially distance. And we've also then got the opportunity to bring filming on board. What I've talked about is, it's fairly positive, I think, in regards to a response to the pandemic. But just to give you an idea in terms of where that leaves us financially, this year in my department, we were forecasted to make £24 million worth of income. We're currently sat at what we believe will be around about £5 million worth of income. So it's a 20% or an 80% drop in our income. We're going to make 20% this year. We would generally make around about £4 million worth of profit, which goes back into the museum. And whilst we have seen a significant additional aid from central government to support us, it's not going to go as far as we need it to in order to support our museum. And it's certainly, currently in the short term, really leaves a huge amount of question marks around the size of the business that we have currently. We were able to put a lot of our staff onto the job retention scheme that the government have provided here in the UK. When that comes to an end in October, as we move to our forecasting for a 4-year period, which we're about to step into, it's going to be a really tricky time for us, like many other businesses are facing across the world. Hopefully that gives you a good understanding in terms of what we've achieved at the Science Museum. I'm here for questions if there's anything to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. That's a really good overview, and it looks as if there are some good news and interesting new ways of thinking behind all of that. So now we'll hand over to Andrew to actually look at what's happening with the visitor experience and what's happening on the floor, as it were. Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lizzy, and thank you, Alistair. My name is Andrew Bailey, as previously introduced, and I'm Head of Operations at the Science Museum in London. I'm going to talk to you about how we've adapted our operational model to allow the museum to operate in a COVID-safe environment, and picking up on some of the things you've already heard Alistair reference in his presentation. What I'd like to take you through is how we've approached this, and we've done this in 3 main ways. Firstly, our people. Secondly, the management of the building itself, our infrastructure and the bricks and mortar. And then finally, the visitor experience. And the first 2 points there, building and people, everything is led to delivering an inspiring visitor experience. So first, let's look at people. People, teams, colleagues, whatever they're called in your organization, like us, are very important to us. So from the start of lockdown through remobilization and to opening, we've actively engaged and communicated with our teams. Senior managers have hosted blogs, we've produced bi-weekly bulletins, we've done direct newsletters from museum directors, and department managers have used this new medium called Teams to keep in touch with their teams themselves and encourage staff to continue with training and or development. I know, for example, that quizzes, learning a new language, and community volunteering have all featured very heavily in what the teams have done. At the end of July, each museum issued a welcome backpack, that's the section in the middle of the screen there, which highlighted the key changes in each of the museum areas, rather than giving them an overview of everything they already know. This presented an easy-to-read format. The example used at the Science Museum, for example, was done in alphabetical order, just for an ease of reference. Immediately prior to opening each of the museums in the group, we did an extensive onboarding and induction process, or essentially a re-onboarding and a re-induction, given that for most of the teams and many of the staff, this felt like essentially starting a new job. At those sessions where the teams were presented, they had sessions around the building, a building walk around, which many found very useful, chance to reset passwords and ask questions before they come back into the building full time. All front of house staff and all back of house staff receive a PPE pack. For the front of house staff returning, they got that on the day of these sessions. And in that PPE pack, we include a visor, 5 face coverings, which are reusable, and a hand sanitizer for themselves, which are refillable around the museum. We've received really positive feedback from our teams on our approach to this with PPE. So let's talk about the building itself, the bricks and mortar element of the building. In our case, it's the main museum. Clearly getting our buildings ready for a complete shutdown, from a complete shutdown to reopening was a mammoth task. And some would say it was actually more difficult to reopen the museum than it was to actually close it, lock it down, or mothball it. We've worked, and I have worked with colleagues from estates, operations, gallery services, collections, conservation, cleaners, security, communications and design, all in a collaborative way to bring the museum back to life, ready for reopening, which we did as a soft launch on the 17th of August. In the UK, we are obliged to have conducted a full risk assessment and, more importantly, shared this with our staff. This ensures that we can demonstrate we are operating in a COVID-safe environment and applies to both visitor and colleagues. The National Tourist Board of England also supported an accreditation scheme to support easy recognition, and we're very proud to display this logo you see on screen on our entrance doors. So we've got our people aligned, we've got our building ready to go. So how did we achieve this, and what does the new visitor experience look like? As Alistair's already alluded to, pre-booking a free ticket online is now essential for visiting museums in the UK. This is our key control to managing capacity, and we have limited the number of tickets available. Visitors simply book to arrive in a 15-minute slot, and this further helps us maintain social distant queue lines outside the building. There is no requirement to have a timed visit, so dwell time can vary. At minus T3 days and T1 day, visitors receive a pre-visit email giving further information about their visit, and there's also a link to a pre-visit video. On arrival at the museum, visitors have the opportunity to see one of our first key safety messages. These are sleeves which we place over the queue line barriers. It re-emphasises the message we've received since lockdown in March. Very simply, keep your distance, sanitise your hands, and wear a face covering. When visitors arrive, outside the museum itself, there is a huge banner, you can't miss it. Some would say not so subtle. This allows us to remind visitors of the need to be able to pre-book tickets to visit. Although on a daily basis, we do allow walk-up tickets for those who simply don't have access to the internet. And this supports our objective of being open for all. On arrival onto the main concourse, visitors are invited to use the contactless scanners to scan their arrival ticket. And naturally, we prefer this to be on a mobile device. You can see here in the picture, 2 of our visitors wearing face coverings, which was mandatory in museums from early August, scanning their ticket on a mobile device. PERSPEX screens are now commonplace, as they are in many locations, and in our museums, they are placed at strategic locations around our buildings. This provides protection for both staff and visitors alike. The example you see on screen is of the walk-up ticket desk on the front concourse. Once visitors pass through the main arrival point and into the museum itself, we continue with our in-house message and at regular points throughout the visitor journey. What's significant here is the colour scheme and the colour tone we have used, because this, whilst it appears in our brand colour palette, is very different to how it's normally used in the museum. This means this message and this signage sticks out and therefore is very overt for people to see it as they guide themselves through the museum. Variations of these messages are used where relevant, and for example, in the cafe or the picnic areas, the sign you see on the left, we use a variation of that. This is also the first point on the front concourse where a visitor can sanitize their hands. We use this as a supplementary way of providing a safe environment, but not as a substitute to washing hands, which is clearly still one of the best defences. Staff are on hand behind a screen or wearing PPE to answer questions or queries. New visual wayfinding is available, and they can also help themselves to a map. Enhanced cleaning is one of the key operating activities that we need to ensure a COVID-safe environment, and it's one of the most frequently asked questions from staff in advance of opening and returning to the museum. It also features heavily in some of our feedback from visitors. We already had a regular daily clean of the museum, as you would expect. To support visitors and staff with hand washing, sanitizer stations are located around the museum and shown here before they were placed in their locations. There are 75 units in the Science Museum in London alone. To enhance this, we've implemented additional cleans 3 times a day. Team A look after the high touch points of lifts, handrails, doors, etc. And Team B look after interactives. We still have 285 interactives in the museum active. Here's an example of what the mathematics gallery looked like at our planning stage and the location of interactives which needed to be cleaned. There are 2 versions of hand sanitizer in use, front of house and back of house, and they're shown on screen, left and middle. We've also got sanitizer wipe stations. In the public areas, these appear in picnic areas and our main interactive gallery. And in the back of house areas, these are available in their offices for the purposes of desk cleaning, equipment and or kitchen services. On desks, it's interesting to note that we now operate a desk booking system for back of house teams. We used to have somewhere in the region of 550 desk locations in the Science Museum alone in London. That's now reduced to COVID secure 155 desks available for booking. On this slide, we used our map in order to heat map the museum, and we did this in one of the very early stages of operations. I'd like to say at this point, a lot of the information you're seeing, we are operating in a Science Museum group across 5 museums. And I wouldn't want anyone to think who's operating in a smaller venue that these items we're discussing today are not scalable for your organisation or your location. Here, the green represents large open spaces for visitors to easily move around the museum. Our pinch points are coloured in red, toilets, lifts, stairs, etc. And these are no different to operating in a pre-COVID world. The Science Museum Group does have the benefit of large open spaces, but in some of our museums, the National Railway Museum in York, for example, one-way routes have been implemented. For London, very, very few of these have been implemented. Our only restricted areas are in 4 locations of the museums where it's one-way, and we have a one-in, one-out system in 2 rooms in the Medicine Gallery. Lifts and stairs are fully operational, as you would expect. We did start with the thought process on one-way stairs, but soon eradicated that as an option. On stairs, we advise our visitors to keep left, and for lifts, we promote their use only when necessary. Most lifts are single use, and where they are larger, they can safely accommodate multiple households, families, or bubbles. In this example, you see here shown for 2. Lift floor markings, top right-hand corner, are where we would advise people to stand in their groups once they're in the lift area. Onto toilets, I know you've been waiting for this part. There was lots of discussion around toilets, and I too attended a very useful webinar devoted entirely to this subject alone. Managing them would have not only been impractical, but would be an expensive task. So with clear signage, we ask our visitors to self-manage their use of these facilities. Operationally, every other urinal, WC, sink, etc. is available to support social distancing, and the signs we use for that are the ticks or the hands on the top. On the floor is a section where we would use the X's for not using urinals, for example. As a group, we took the decision to take hand dryers out of service and return to hand towels temporarily in multi-use toilets. In our accessible toilets, which are single use, they remain as a visitor choice. The WONDERLAB gallery, which Alistair's also alluded to, is our interactive gallery and the most interactive part of the museum. and it's on our main section of the 3rd floor. We only closed 5 interactives in this section of the gallery, and they're, not surprisingly, are the items which involve close proximity to the face or mouth. That principle applies in some other areas of the museum. Clearly for us, it was about keeping as much of a normal museum experience as best possible so that we can continue to inspire futures and give and deliver an inspiring visitor experience. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand you over to Spencer Clark. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. Okay. So thanks for having us. Interesting. It's really great to be involved in the talk. Obviously, a lot of the conversations you had are with museums, galleries, cultural sites, but there's a significant supply chain to the sector, and so for us to have a voice and actually explain our role in this and how we're trying to support our clients, but COVID's hitting all of us, so it's really good to be involved and kind of share our experience of it. So I'm just going to share my screen just to go a few bits, just to give you a quick run on pre-COVID. So yeah, pre-COVID. Well, ATS Areas, we provide audio and multimedia guides. So we provide on-site services, some staffing as well at St. Paul's Cathedral. We staff and manage that site and provide staffing at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and a few other sites. So pre-COVID, yeah, we were 25,000 handsets out in the field being used regularly, delivering about 1 million visitors experiences a year across multiple languages and plenty of content across audio and multimedia and things like that. Obviously, a part of our service before that is all about visitor experience and routing and wayfinding, and COVID lockdown during that period of 3 to 4 months was really just keeping in touch with our clients as closely as possible, because no one really knew the confidence there of what was reopening even going to look like was quite a challenge. So essentially we looked at what they were having to reopen with the COVID restrictions, with social distancing and routing and along. So it's kind of part of our design process anyway, of looking at these things. So this was a very rapid, almost prototyping phase, I suppose, talking with clients and trying to work out, which was essentially a moving target of what the requirements were going to be on reopening. So yeah, it was 3 to 4 months of talking and working out what was really gonna happen. But over the last few months, I think the main thing really for reopening was to get visitors back into our sites, was to remove that fear of coming to a site. And Alistair mentioned it earlier, it was about maintaining that best possible visitor experience, and Andrew was saying as well, but to sanitize your environment, but not the visitor experience. And so that was obviously coming through very clearly, that we need to be open and welcoming. So what can we do around that? The biggest impact, I think, on the social distancing is the routing around and the crowding and the pinch points. So again, Andrew kind of showed the heat map there of some of those pinch points within a site. We do that in the design process for a linear tour, or whether it's a random access tour in a site as well. So we're already thinking, well, okay, where are the pinch points in this experience as we go along? And when we're telling stories at different parts in that visitor, we don't want to cause pinch points and unnecessary dwell times in uncomfortable spaces. So routing and wayfinding was always on our agenda. So the guides have been really great. We've been able to modify and change the content according to these new rules. So again, it's working with every site and really doing that kind of heat map thing that Andrew showed. So where before we may have had an audio stop, we may just remove completely. A lot of our multimedia guides have layers within there. So when you get to a main stop, you can then dig deeper into further content. Well, based on that, some of those stops we've had to remove. On the other hand, there's now, because of the reduced capacity of museums and galleries and our sites, that they have less people visiting, has actually opened up the opportunity for people to stay longer. And so some of that content in those areas we've allowed. So routing's been really important. One of the things we also work with our clients on, I'd say 80% of our business is audio and multimedia guides, but we do a lot of digital and film work as well. So again, talking with our clients, say, what else can we help you with? And one of the things that came around was, right, when we reopen, we really need to communicate with our visitors. Andrew's shown all the communication with the staff, which has been essential before reopening, but then driving visitors. Welcome videos we just saw a massive need for those, to be able to set expectations for the visitor. And it was really important that the visitors were aware of what they were going to walk into, and what their responsibilities were as a visitor, as well as saying what the responsibilities of the site was. So again, being respectful, wearing masks now, and keeping social distance whilst you're moving around, and just basically being a nice visitor. And on their hand, what will we do? Well, we'll do material and cleaning and how you would actually enter. So we did a lot of videos. Bletchley Park did one as well, where we actually filmed from the arrival, where you go through the ticket hall, when you go and pick up your guide, when you're then going around the park, what else you can do. Same with Westminster Abbey as well, and showing them the signage up front. So again, it's just really good communication. So where Alistair was saying earlier, how we're getting a lot more engagement online and making sure that that the whole experience is cohesive. Well, that was really important, that whilst we're encouraging people to buy tickets or book online, is at that point we can also tell them what they're going to experience. So there's less fear when they get there. There's more of an easier flow and a comfort from the visitor to be confident that it's going to be a good experience. So lots of that signage. We've seen lots of examples. Yeah, we worked a lot with them, because essentially when visitors get a guide, that's another touch point for us to be able to communicate with the visitor. So just reaffirming messaging on through their signage, making sure the branding's the same. I'm seeing lots of bright pink signage, which across from churches, cathedrals to obviously science museums as well. So yeah, nice and bright, really clean, and obvious stuff. Touched upon visibility, PPE being really visible of the staff. Again, people giving confidence to visitors. Cleaning processes. Well, pre-COVID, we were cleaning devices anyway, so it was just a matter of looking at that and saying, well, can they be cleaned more thoroughly? And so we do that on display more so now. So again, showing visitors that they're actually being cleaned in front of them, again, giving them confidence. One of the concerns was headphones. We provide headphones with ours, which are completely wipe clean, but the concern over, is that going to be a barrier to visitors? Well, we encourage visitors to use their own headphones if they want to, and then they can use the device as well. Also, cleaning and distribution, looking at the self-serve. When you turn up to get your guide, instead of being handed it, we're just demonstrating, there's minimum touch points on the things you're going to touch amongst you. So they'll be put down on a desk and you can pick them up yourselves, select your own language or tour yourself. And so it becomes more of a self-serve solution, really. So there were the kind of main things about removing the fear. And I think as a company, we were really looking at, the content, the messaging and the routing as a navigation tool as well to kind of support that sort of stuff. I wouldn't mind touching upon on something. So, well, this is just kind of an example actually of the routing and content, how you can break down the layers. And again, this is what we had full control of being able to take bits out, add bits in, change graphics. So with our content management system, it's relatively straightforward to make those changes and update the devices really quickly. So again, if that messaging, I know a lot of companies at one point printed a lot of 2 meter distancing, and then that turned to 1 meter, and so there's that flexibility that you need with these changing rules that are coming in. So having a system like this, you can update content very easily and very quickly. So that was really valuable, especially in the time constraints that we had. There was a lot of talk as soon as we went into lockdown. I read a lot of people saying, this is the death of the audio guide and the multimedia guide. No one's ever going to want devices. They won't be touching touch screens, and all those types of messaging coming through. We were patient. We looked at how things were going, and we gladly report that following reopening, all of our client sites have reported a similar take up to the on-site devices as they had done pre-COVID. So though they've got lower numbers, the fear in using an on-site device is not there and hasn't really come about. So we're really pleased with that. I think that kind of just shows that once you are cleaning things, you don't go to a restaurant and take your own cutlery. You don't go to a supermarket and take your own trolley. So there's all these elements that, you know, across all of our day-to-day lives, I think we just got to, it really brought to light for me that, you know, just don't assume, let's watch visitor behavior and see what they're doing rather than kind of, you know, making some assumptions early on. So that's been positive. Saying that, you know, on site, we think there's going to be a growing demand potentially for bring your own devices and apps as well. But so far the figures are showing really when we do, you know, when you're putting out a downloadable app in a tour style, a lot of our clients have both on-site devices and we've given them an app. The take-up's about 5%, less than 5% on the app. And then when you put a device to, you know, to every single visitor, you're just getting better penetration and you have greater reach for your story. So again, when we're talking about don't sanitize your experience and make sure you're giving them the best thing, the guides basically, yeah, if you can get them in more hands, then you're going to be winning basically. So just to kind of look here, we did a lot of webinars prior to, you know, during this period and during reopening. It's been great just to have a pulse on you know, not just our clients, but just the sector as a whole and seeing how we're all getting on and suppliers and the like. Findings recently, we're finding people increased engagement and dwell times because, like we said, we are less visitors, longer time to spend, lots more engagement with staff and talking, and people just staying longer, which is great. So again, having more content and things to do there means people are staying there longer. Definitely seeing a change in audiences, so being able to provide family tours and content that's more aligned to children. Obviously, look at Alistair, you know, the growth in the STEM, the demand for STEM content. Yeah, we're seeing that as well, seeing a younger audience kind of coming through. I do say young as it is still, yeah, up to 45. I think they're classed as younger audiences.
I'd like to think so. Spencer, we'll need to move on quite soon.
No problem. So yeah, essentially they're the kind of highlights. We've got some blogs there that we've written. So yeah, be agile and flexible, I think, and you won't get things right the first time. I think that was the big learning. So
brilliant. Thank you very much, Spencer. And I'm glad to think that 45-year-olds are still young. And now on to Joe for some really interesting insight into what audience are already thinking about going back to museums. So Joe, over to you.
Thank you, and thanks, Spencer. I hope you can all see my screen. Yeah. So we've heard a lot already this afternoon about.
We need to try and fix your screen. Okay. It hasn't shared yet.
Okay. Do you have it now?
Yes, it seems to be loading. Okay. Yep, and then you just need to do
slideshow.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, we got that now. Okay. Yeah. So we've heard a lot about, thank you, Spencer and others. We've heard a lot about getting the logistics right for reopening and how much emphasis is being placed on safety and hygiene and the impressive measures organisations like the Science Museum are going to. And I want to add another perspective to what we're calling this kind of new normal. This photograph was taken in February by me at the Don McCullin exhibition at Tate Britain, clearly well before the COVID world. And while some people enjoy the throng and the buzz of very crowded spaces and exhibitions, it's part of the experience for them. Many people don't, and I think it's interesting that several of you have already commented on that. Others want space and time to be able to reflect on things. And that was true before COVID, and it's true since. So although people have a lot of expectations about, you know, how the COVID experience will be dealt with, a lot of their values and the things they want haven't changed from before COVID. So there are two key things I want to talk to you about. One is what determines what visitors want, and then another perspective on how to welcome them back that adds to the whole safety and hygiene issue. So this almost all our COVID news is presented through the prism of age groups, completely understandably, because we know that COVID affects older people significantly more. And there have been a number of large studies in the cultural sector. This one from Australia, which from Wolf Brown and Pattern Makers, which I think was a very large study. And Indigo in the UK and Slova Linnet in the US. And they're very useful and give us lots of information about what people might expect. But they mostly viewed the post-COVID world through the same prism with a focus on behaviour and demographics. But what this Australian study shows us, and this slide, is that in a survey of nearly 19,000 attenders, while there's a small correlation with age in terms of how people feel about going out again, so you can see at the top here, 6% of under 35s won't go out until there's absolutely no risk, but that compares to 17% of over 75. So there's a small correlation with age, but this is the one that's interesting. These are the people who will go as soon as it's permitted. So it's exactly the same proportion of under 35s and over 75s. What this model tells us is that age doesn't predict how likely people are to return. And the reasons for this are twofold. One is that they trust you to get the logistics of protecting them right. And I think all the information you gave us, Andrew, about how the Science Museum is doing it explains why that is. You know, you're used to looking after ancient or precious or priceless objects and paintings. So they know that you're going to be able to look after them, and the kind of information you've given them, they take that for a given. So once the hygiene and logistics have been dealt with, it's people's more deep-seated values and beliefs and personality traits that will determine when they're likely to move, to revisit you. So if socio-demographics like age influence a decision to return only very likely, we need a better map, not one that goes back to 2019 because we're in a very different world. We need one that looks at those deeper reasons as to what will make people return. So we did a study using our culture segment system, which looks at people, the reason people's engage with culture. We also looked at need states to understand what people want from the post-COVID experience. And we also looked at behavioral psychology, looking at emotional resilience and propensity for risk-taking. So this was a study of 5,000 people undertaken in the UK, New York and Sweden, 3 of our core territories. As I mentioned, we used culture segments as a prism. This is our market segmentation system that specializes in the cultural sector. And it has this range of segments. I won't go into all the detail. There's plenty of information on our website. But it ranges from people for whom culture is everything, art is everything in their lives, to people who are more interested specifically in history and heritage, nostalgia, to what we call the entertainment segment, people who are more interested in having fun and possibly mainstream leisure. And what we find is that these give us a different insight and a more meaningful and reliable basis on which to build strategy and programming, communications and more interpretation, for example. And what we know is that all these segments from all the research we've been doing during lockdown have had a different lockdown. They've all used digital differently. They have different approaches to reopening. They want different things from the pre-opening experience. And so while each organization will have a different proportion of these segments, most of you will have some of all of them. And the difference it might make, interestingly, as a couple of you have commented on, is that this segment Essence, they're delighted that they're going to have the gallery or the museum space to themselves. But, you know, bearing in mind, obviously, we all have commercial imperatives to look at. Whereas other people, those who are more interested in stimulation, they're very social and they want to experience it with others. So they're not too keen on all that social distancing. So this is very important in how we're engaging with our audiences as we come out of COVID. So this is the model that we found emerged from that research, and we've called it the hierarchy of the COVID mind. So we have this very deep-seated inner self where people's values, beliefs and personality traits frame their relationship to culture and society, and they haven't changed. You know, they're very deep-seated. They want to be reassured about the experience, but the reasons they're going to go are still very similar. The next level, we have what we call the need states. So the immediate social, intellectual, emotional and spiritual outcomes people seek from engaging with culture. And as I've just said, the segments have inherently different needs from what they want from the experience. We are finding in all our research that there are 2 needs which are quite common across the segments at the moment, and you won't be surprised by these. One is a desire to experience some joy against the sort of grimness of what's happening in the world, and the other is a desire for human contact. And while people appreciate they can't have, you know, as much physical contact as they might have had previously, or as much closeness, there are still ways in which I think cultural organisations can provide that. And then the level of the third level, deliberation, this is where people are making the decision of weighing up the rewards of going based on, you know, versus how much risk they're prepared to take. This is a model for one of the organisations. So bearing in mind that we've shown that age is not a key driver, we looked at likelihood to return through these lenses of culture segments, risk and emotional resilience. So what this is telling us from these segments, so for this organisation, this is the proportion of the circle tells you how many of these people they have in their audience. So what this is telling us is that if on reopening, you're going to be targeting the perspective and the stimulation segments, in essence, people here because they have high emotional resilience, so they're not too worried and stressed, and they also have a high risk propensity, so they're prepared to take risks as long as they know that they are assured by you that you will be looking after people. So this is when they'll return. These people will return first. So you'll be targeting these people, keeping an eye on these, and then these people, these segments, are going to be returning last, and they're possibly not even going to return this year or even the beginning of the next year. They won't be coming until they're absolutely sure that there is no risk whatsoever. So the point of this is that we need to understand the mindsets of the different segments of our audience, when they're likely to be coming, and therefore what they want from the experience. The second point I want to make is how do we welcome them back effectively? So what we found, we've just done an extremely large study of 119,000 people across 120 sites. I can't talk too much about it because we haven't published the results. They'll be out at the end of the month. But there's two big findings which have come through really strongly. One is that safety doesn't sell, but care and humour does. So in the ways that Andrew was describing, the Science Museum are dealing with it. They expect you to have that in place. They take that as a given, and they really trust most cultural organisations to do that well. What they want is welcoming as well as informing. So not masks must be worn, please comply, but also the messaging of we'll keep everyone safe by ensuring that others wear the mask. So they're as concerned about how strictly you will ensure compliance with everybody as in giving the instructions about how to do it. I just want to give you one small example of this lovely example from one of our clients in Sweden. This is the Royal Armouries. This is a 3-minute video on social media on Facebook, which I urge you to look at. I'm not playing it here because it's in Swedish and it's 3 minutes. But they're using humour to welcome visitors back. So the subject line for the video is, sure, corona safety doesn't exist, but we've done the best we could. And they then go on to show you how they do that. They start with a statement saying that they've been closed for 86 days. It was tough, but we made it through. And they then show a few funny videos of the staff in the museum engaging in a quite a humorous way. The safety then comes with this chap in the armour walking towards you. They then describe how they've got almost 400 years of working with personal protective equipment, and a whole section on showing you how he puts his armour on. They then show how he's ready to welcome you back again and inviting you back into the museum. And this takes about a minute and a half of the whole segment, but it's done in a really lovely, welcoming and humorous way. Finally, they show you about the sanitizing, and then they take you through the museum, through the shop and the different areas, and show you how they're doing that cleaning. So this is all in advance of being there. So people are reassured before they even arrive at the museum. And this has had a really lovely and fantastic response from audiences. You can see here just a few of the comments from Facebook. So people talking about how the humour has really helped, how they've made the best of a situation. So they're bringing their audiences with them. They're developing that relationship with them. And it's the humour and the warmth of this which is really making a difference. So that's our main points. There's quite a bit of our writing on these issues on Medium and on our own website, if you'd like to look at some more. And of course, we'd love to hear more from you on examples you've got of how organisations are dealing with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's a really insightful way to finish what has been a fantastic panel. And we've got quite a few questions coming in. So perhaps whilst what you have said, Joe, is still fresh in our minds, perhaps you could answer Yayoi's question. She says, these are really exciting results. Could you talk a little about the research methods employed to develop the hierarchy of COVID mind model?
This particular research was done through a survey, but it was informed by the fact our culture segments model is informed by a hierarchy of the mind model. So we already had a version of the hierarchy of the mind, and so we knew the type of questioning to do. So it was actually done through survey research.
And I remember Andrew talking about actually using behavioural psychologists and things. When you used academics to actually really look at it psychologically.
To inform the design of the questions, absolutely. And
yeah.
We did that for culture segments and then redid it again for this. So yeah, so there's a lot of kind of cross-disciplinary thinking has gone into it.
Right.
Yeah.
And we had another question regarding surveying for both Science Museum and for Joe from Marge Ainsley. How have you changed your visitor surveys and how you actually conduct them with regards to being COVID compliant?
Well, at the moment, very few of our clients have reopened, so it's very new. So we've been doing, as everybody else has, mainly online for surveying, and we've been doing a large number of online focus groups and depth interviews. So at the moment, it's been mainly online. And like everybody else, we're just rolling out ways of doing it in venue, taking all the same safety precautions that people are talking about. It is quite easy to interview someone with a distance, as long as you can have a slightly quieter space in which to do that. And bearing in mind that desire for human contact, I mean, we anticipate there will always be some people who don't want to interact. And that may be true pre-COVID. It may be enhanced post, as we're emerging hopefully out of the other side, but there are always people who do want to talk, and they just want to be reassured in the way that Andrew described, that they are being kept safe through that, whatever it is you're doing.
Yes, yeah. And perhaps Andrew and Alistair, do you have any comments from a sort of live museum point of view? Are you carrying out surveys on site?
We're not carrying out surveys on site at the moment. And one aspect we have reverted to, now that we have everyone's details for the purposes of booking online, we do a post-visit survey as well that goes out into their inbox. So we've got that ability then to have more detailed and direct engagement with our audience.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
and Alistair,
you very helpful in terms of the areas that we need to pick up on, improve on. But we've had some really positive comments as well, really, about the overall experience, which is great to share with our teams. The hard work and effort that not just those front of house staff are doing, but a huge number of back of house teams that have supported, getting these museums back up and running. So yeah, it's good to share that that joy that people have expressed to us.
And Spencer, can some of your devices be used to capture for data capture and some sort of surveying at the end of the tour?
Absolutely, yeah. We've had that in the devices for a while. So yeah, you can do either some real basic 5-star review midway through or at the end of the tour, but we're doing a lot more kind of comments and feedback as well, and chatting with clients. Well, what else do you want to know? What else do you want to ask? But at the same time, whilst you're using that device, you don't want to interrupt and annoy the visitor. But at the same time, when's the optimum time to ask those questions? But yeah, our system then collects all that, and you can go and access it in the cloud and do your reports and stuff. So yeah, fantastic.
And I think we've got a question about the cost. Alice Pearson was asking Alistair, which he's already answered it in the chat, but if you could just sort of go over the costs of putting in all of that amazing sort of COVID compliant operations. That is absolutely extraordinary what you've done, and across 5 sites.
I just had to try and pay for it by selling some stuff in the shop.
Yeah, I think I started with the obvious answer, which was it wasn't cheap. And obviously, as working in this sector, we need to look after every cost. So I think I referenced there circa 50k, which is really around the initial install, because obviously you've got on costs. You know, I now have teams who go around and fill up sanitizer every other day. So I think the most important thing here is to acknowledge that we've tried to find creative ways to reduce that cost as much as we possibly can, which is using some of our in-house teams who built the PERSPEX screens, for example. They're not off the shelf. They've been made and crafted in-house by the museum, which really reduces the cost rather than going out to market. And the same has happened with teams to work on how we did the arrival process for the scanners. So a lot of that equipment we already had, because we were already using scanners for some of our other activities within the museum. So, and we will continue to watch this. So now that the market, I think, has settled a little in relation to getting this sort of kit, you can see prices have changed somewhat and actually how they market. So it's that supply and demand element. So yeah, we will continue and monitor those spaces.
Just one final question from Kate Neal. When do you expect school visits to return, and how will these be different?
So we're already doing some work on school visits. I mean, we welcome over 300,000 educational visits usually every year, which, you know, as a key museum in the UK is really important to us. So that's a huge demographic we're not having access to at the moment. Yeah. The main thing for us is we expect now, we've had some appetite for visitors from schools to come back at the end of November. Largely local schools where there's no travelling involved and they can walk to the museum, particularly in London. And then we're now working towards it, the expectation that it would be January onwards, so once they return from Christmas.
Right.
And just to add to that, they're a key revenue driver for us as well, particularly with some of our attractions like the IMAX theatre in London that we've got, and the same in Bradford. We need to get those school visitors back to make those spaces viable.
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean, everything is changing, all the government guidelines. It's so difficult really to plan anything. But I think what you guys have put in place, and with the support of people like Morris, Hargreaves, McIntyre and ATS Heritage, and some of the people who sort of work with museums to make the visitor experience what it is, I think we can all be very proud of what you've done. And I know a lot of visitors are very happy to have museums operating again. That's what it's really all about. So thank you all very much. I'm really, really impressed with everything that I've learned today so much. And see you soon in the next webinar.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.